Later on, Mike, I'd like you to tell me about the genesis of this alternative Mike Leigh persona with which you've managed to fool the British media now for many, many years.
Undeliberately.
Undeliberately. I mean, where does it originate from, this view of you, instead of being the touchy-feely person who I've just encountered, being a cantankerous, difficult man?
Absolutely.
Today, I'm walking into Soho to meet Mike Leigh in his favourite cafe. I've admired Leigh's work all of my life. Indeed, I sometimes feel as if I grew up in a Mike Leigh play. He often describes himself as a sort of cultural bohemian, an outsider, all of these things. And I suppose I've always felt some affinity towards him and his work at that level. I think the first time I saw his plays on television, what struck me immediately was a kind of agonised response to the British/English social milieu that seemed totally original. It was a kind of infusion of Beckettian, Pintoresque kind of dramaturgy into what on the face of it were very, very normal plays or television plays about very, very ordinary people. He's a filmmaker that is in many ways preoccupied by the relationships between men and women. His films are very much, and unusually very much, centred on women and the impact of women, as it were, vertically within family structures through generations. And I think that it builds up into a fascinating picture of perceptions of male-female relationships over the last 20 to 30 years. The remarkable thing about Mike Leigh's film Naked is that it has an absolutely mythic quality, this. It almost seems like a story of the exclusion of one man from the world on a par with a Greek myth. But I think what he and David Thewlis capture in the character of Johnny is a kind of highly articulate, intelligent disaffection that you might hear in the disordered ranting of somebody with florid schizophrenia, or you might hear in the ranting of a street alcoholic. This is the unsayable about modern culture, and yet it's being said, and not only said, but said at great length and with great power and eloquence.
What can such a specific prophecy mean? What is the mark? Well, the mark, Brian, is the barcode, the ubiquitous barcode that you'll find on every bog roll and every packet of Johnnies and every poxy pork pie, and every barcode is divided into two parts by 3 markers, and those 3 markers are always represented by the number 6. 6, 6, 6. Now, what does it say? No one shall be able to buy or sell without that mark. And now, what they're planning to do in order to eradicate all credit card fraud and in order to precipitate a totally cashless society, what they're planning to do, what they've already tested on the American troops, they're going to subcutaneously laser tattoo that mark onto your right hand or onto your forehead. They're going to replace plastic with flesh. Fact.
You can analyse Mike Leigh's films in terms of, particular levels of social and political concern, and what their characters are involved in a local sense. But if you pull back a bit, you can see that what he's really concerned with are very, very large themes indeed, and his characters are always, concerned either with their inability to give love, or their inability to receive love, or their loveless situations. And that's where the real bedrock of compassion in his work comes from. In the best sense of all, this is a form of spiritual art that he's trying to convey. But he seems to cover a lot of the same sort of London as I've covered over the years, covered in fiction and in reality, and whether or not that's serendipity or some kind of eye for the same places, I don't know. So I suppose in a way it's no surprise to walk into central London and to walk into Soho and find Leigh ensconced there with his beady eye. Hi, Mike.
I will.
How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Bonza, as we say in the Australian rules football team.
Oh, that's what you said.
During the Thatcher years, your work can be seen as one of the great powerhouses of criticism, or loci of criticism of the incumbent regime. So, you know, would you have, in a sense, been bizarrely disappointed if you were no longer able to take an oppositional position towards the culture?
No, I don't think. Frankly, I think that's sort of neither here nor there. Because I mean, it would be presumptuous and simply dishonest and disingenuous for me to suggest to you or anybody else that what I do is obviously a direct critique of what Blair's doing or anything else. I mean, it's not that. It's a reflection of things rather than. I mean, it's not. It's still my stuff. Could not really be classified as strictly, conclusively propagandist and didactic. I mean, it's there in the.
Yeah, it's not agitprop. It's something that comes within the purliest of the characters that you're dealing with.
Yeah, and it's implicit. Yeah, absolutely.
Nonetheless, I mean, one would have to say, I mean, looking at, say, the difference between the way you deal with the aspirational lower middle class characters in High Hopes and the way you deal with them in Secrets and Lies, there seems to be a inclusion of those characters and a humanisation of them and an acceptance of those kinds of aspirations.
Yes. Different film, different spirit, different agenda, if one has to say that. As in Abigail's Party, I mean, you know, what I'm doing is lamenting that kind of vacuous lifestyle, that waste of lives. That's there in Secrets and Lies, but there's a whole other thing on the go. It's not about that. It's about, you know, saying, hey, well, that's not, that issue is dealt with. Let's now come from another angle and look at, you know, what these people are about in terms of the potential of their lives in other contexts.
I mean, it seems to me that, you know, if your work is about anything, if you are commenting, as it were, diacritically on class as it's commonly understood, the characters who, and it's not saying you dislike, the characters who get a rum deal in the pieces are the people who won't come out of the character of class. It's not so. It's the people who won't be themselves beyond it.
That's right.
And the people who one falls in love with are the people for whom class is clearly irrelevant, who are acting at the level of human interaction, at the level of love. I mean, what I want to say to you is that the characters that, as it were, your pieces love are the characters who are concerned primarily with questions of love. You know,
yeah, I mean, I think that's right, and I mean, Topsy Turvy is about, apart from anything else, I mean, where it's sort of fundamentally just another one of my films, despite its surface.
Well, I did sort of feel that you'd managed to get a time machine and sort of take your crew back to...
Yeah, absolutely. But apart from that, I mean, what it's actually about is the thing that is central to what you're now talking about in all of my films. It's about masks. It's about the mask, the thing we are forced to be, that society expects us to be, the behaviour we're supposed to conform with, and, you know, the tension between that and what's behind the mask. I mean, you know, what goes on backstage or below the surface. And I mean, what you're talking about are all the characters in my films who really are dealing with having to, with pretentiousness and with all of those things. That's what it's about.
I suppose one of the things, the strongest feelings I have, obviously reading the critical stuff that's been written about your work, watching the work again, is that it seems to me that your ability, and I think at the end of, as we stand now, I think of you, and I don't say this either lightly or remotely flippantly, I think of you as essentially a spiritual artist, in that you're concerned with fundamental issues of the human spirit.
I think that's absolutely right, and I mean, without, I hope, appearing in any way self-congratulatory, I mean, just looking at it objectively in terms of definitions, I would absolutely agree with your definition of what it is that I do. It is about the spirit, it's about life, it's about those fundamental things. It isn't about, in the end, it's not about the surface things any more than your work is, actually.
No, I mean,
so the surface is always important.
I mean, it seems to me, I mean, sort of that
I describe my work as a kind of dirty magical realism, and what I do is I infuse surrealism into the everyday. So I take off from sort of your hand on that spoon and describing it in great precision to a sort of alternative world. And it seems to me that the role of sort of, critics become fixated on your work as dealing with class, or dealing with, whether is it gauche to put a bottle of Beaujolais in the fridge. But, that's all really, not persiflage, but that's the scene setting for the dilemmas of the human heart.
Absolutely.
I mean, right down to the cactus named Thatcher or whatever.
Absolutely. And I mean, the roots of these things, go back in all sorts of directions. That's what Beckett really is about, strictly. Creating this kind of very physical, visual, specific realities, but actually dealing with something in completely, as you say, spiritual, cosmic, timeless, and inevitable.
Could you imagine living a life like Beckett's, sort of in a foreign country, in some senses quite profoundly isolated for a lot of his life, childless?
No. I can imagine it, certainly, of course, but I wouldn't wish it. It feels, in a very straightforward way, it's certainly very good to be a parent, and it's very good to be in an environment where you simply feel roots, and feel, it's natural to walk about and breathe the air.
That kind of dilemma of, children versus childlessness is quite present in a lot of the work. Is that something that has stayed up very close to your emotional thinking?
Yes, I don't really have a kind of, as it were, a position about it, because I don't think you can, and I certainly don't think you should. The whole issue, really what you've really been saying about my stuff is that it's about life. It's about, being born and dying, and within that journey is the one about having and not having children. And
it would be wrong, I think, to say that your work is not about men just as much as it's about women, but it's notable that it's usually about men within the context of women. Now, is that just because that's the truth about ongoing family existence, or do you think that says something about you, Mike?
It is the truth.
Yeah.
And it probably does, I find this a hard one to be very objective and thus very articulate about. I think, like most of us, I grew up and have grown up and continue to grow up in a world where the tension between whether it's a man's world dominated by women or it's a women's world, in which men are allowed, or whatever it is the tension that's, it's a coil that motivates our lives. And I think that's probably the answer somewhere along the line.
It's almost like some sort of weird, traditional people where, you have moieties of males and females, and, it's like those sort of tribal setups where the men are allowed to pretend that they're in control, but really, and vice versa. There seems to be a lot of that very deep level.
But that analysis, the men are in control, but actually the women are in control, allow the men to be in control, but actually the men are in control, allowing the women to be in control. That is most, if not all, societies, as far as I...
How does sex come into that? For example, coming back to Naked, I remember being with a group of writers at the Melbourne Festival about 5 years ago, where we had a 6-hour heated argument about the opening scene of Naked, about what was actually going on in it, whether it was consensual sex or not.
Is it a rape or is it a rape?
Exactly, yeah. And it really got very bloody and aggressive, this argument, unsurprisingly.
Good.
What was going on there from your angle?
Well,
dare I say it, decode it for me.
Well, yes, I don't think it was a rape. in the sense that I'm absolutely, well, certainly what we constructed was that woman was there by choice, but then the nature of what happened in the sexual moment became ugly and frustrated on his part, which is what he's all about, and therefore rapistic from her point of view. But the notion, I mean, I don't actually think, there's no question that Johnny, the central character in Naked, is not a rapist. That is not rape.
Is it sort of, I mean, I suppose a rather facile interpretation of that is, all men are rapists, or at any rate, all very frustrated men are potentially in situations in which what they're doing.
That is undoubtedly true, and I mean, the sexual animal in you is a potential rapist, and the thing that the aggression, that thing that's in your sexual motivation is there, and I mean, it's in a way it's touch and go whether. A matter of accumulated experience and conditions and all kinds of other stuff as to whether that becomes a rapist or is simply lurks in your sexuality. That's what Naked, in a way, confronts.
So what happened? Were you bored in Manchester?
Was I bored? No, I wasn't bored. I'm never bored. That's the trouble with everybody. You're all so bored. You've had nature explained to you, and you're bored with it. You've had the living body explained to you, and you're bored with it. You've had the universe explained to you, and you're bored with it. So now you just want cheap thrills and, like, plenty of them, and it doesn't matter how tawdry or vacuous they are, as long as it's new, as long as it flashes and bleeps in 40 different colours, or whatever else you can say about me. I'm not bored.
Yeah, all right.
He's enormously charismatic in some ways, isn't he, Johnny?
Yeah, and I mean, the important thing about Johnny is that he's not. I mean, people say, it's a cynical film, he's a cynic. It is not a cynical film. He's not a cynic.
Not a cynic.
On the contrary, he's the opposite of a cynic.
He's an idealist in the true sense.
And deeply frustrated with it.
And deeply frustrated.
Yeah. Because Naked is about the end of the century, the millennium, the apocalypse, the future.
It has an astonishingly mythological feel to it, Naked, doesn't it? I know you've said that you're quite prepared to look at your works again. I mean, how recently have you seen that film, for example?
Not very recently. I do like looking at them again from time to time. You've presumably seen it very recently.
I've seen it very recently, and I found myself... my wife and I found ourselves going to look at books of Greek mythology to try and find out what it was mirroring without any success afterwards, because of course it doesn't precisely mirror any given Greek myth, but it has this feeling of, is it Orpheus descending into the underworld? Is it, is it Orestes returning at the end of the Trojan War? It's got all of that kind of feel about it. It's astonishing levels of resonance about it.
I think it is more, in terms of its the assumed reference with which you invest it. It is more primitive and intuitive and instinctive than it apparently looks. I mean, obviously those things are there to a degree, but I mean there is actually, I read a thesis, an American thesis, which absolutely deconstructs it and decodes it on the most profound level. And the only problem with that is I don't know anything about most of what's in the thesis.
Yeah. Do you feel? I mean, I feel I complete a book, and in some senses that I turn the muse out into the world, and 2 weeks later she's dancing naked on a bar in a pub in King's Cross, and sort of for the delectation of the punters, and I feel pretty bad about that. But when you bring in other human beings into that equation, I mean, what responsibility do you feel towards your actors after it's in the can?
Total, but at the same time, I mean, finally, it's the same thing. I mean, the important thing is that, I mean, apart from anything else, I mean, nobody does anything in front of my camera that they don't want to do. I mean, one of the great things, the daftest things about, since we're talking about Naked, about a lot of response to Naked, is that this was a misogynist film, and I'm a woman-hating misogynist who made all these actresses do all these things. But, I mean, the kind of actresses who do a film like Naked are nothing if not highly intelligent, highly motivated, tough feminists. And you don't, I mean, the sort of actresses who are that malleable, you couldn't make Naked with if you wanted to, basically. So in a way, the answer to your question is that all of that looks after itself, simply because, you know, we have collaborated, and everybody who makes the film has collaborated and shared something, so that in a way I don't go around for the rest of time with any sense of responsibility, because we've shared it. And I mean, I carry the can for it, and I wouldn't, you know, and it's got to work for.
But it's a kind of peak moment for a lot of these people working on one of your pictures, because it's sort of can
That's
be.
true, yeah.
It can be, can't it? Because I mean, one reads time and time again in their accounts of it that, you know, it's never been so good. You know, they've had this peak experience, and I just think that must feel rather strange. I mean, I have a friend who told me about running into David Thewlis a couple of weeks after he finished filming that, and him being unable to get out of character and having difficulties in sort of disentangling himself. Now, of course, this character was partly a genesis of his own, so he has to take some of the responsibility for getting into it. I mean, it's not that you're some Svengali who's buckled him into red shoes.
Not at all. And in fact, yeah, I mean, I kind of, apart from anything else, I'm kind of strict about, you know, this whole thing of being in character, not being in character. The truth is that in that particular instance, I mean, David did really
go there.
It took. What happens is there's a difference between being in character all the time, which is not what happens, because if it did, you couldn't make the film, and I think it's unhealthy, and I discourage that. But that's one thing. But there's a quite other thing, which, again, can only be familiar to you, which is that when you're engaged with a piece of work, day in, day out, for months on end, that is your life, and it takes hold of you. And if that piece of work is being the character, then obviously that does get you. And of course it varies from character to character. A character like Johnny in Naked sure as hell got to the guy.
Yeah.
And he did.
Yeah. But I mean, one of the things that occurred to me, I suppose, is that, you know, I work just with the content of my head and a piece of paper or a computer screen or whatever, and you developed throughout your career and are continuing to develop this ensemble method of working. I wonder what it's like to have a palette that includes, as it were, human colours in that way.
The great thing about, for me, about that is that working with other people, far from making it into the kind of diffused committee job that a lot of people, mostly paranoid writers, always assume it is, it actually simply makes the whole thing richer, and it focuses and focuses. Because I've got any number of choices, because it's not the actors who are the characters. I mean, I work with the actors to create characters and thus to create a world, and not just the actors. I mean, obviously the input of everybody else to create the whole world of the film is all part of the
How much sort of, I think self-parody is too strong, but how much sort of wryness was there in the portrait of putting together the Mikado in Topsy Turvy? I mean, and in Gilbert's scenes in particular, blocking out the actors.
Well, it's obviously there. I mean, you know, I mean, the parallels between. Well, actually, it wasn't just for me. I mean, plenty of people involved were in some way or other depicting their own working lives. But obviously, you know, if the question, and I'm glad it isn't so crude, but were it, is there any of Gilbert in me? Then it may be a bit, but not really, because it's a whole different philosophy of an approach to things. But yeah, I mean, just as a sort of an implicit way, of course, that was part of the fun of doing it.
So my response to that was, and this I suppose says a lot about my solipsism and difficulties in getting on with the world, was I always have this peculiar envy, and looking at something like that I think, oh, isn't it great for Mike? He's got these people that he's in these very intimate relationships with. Not only that, they're sort of actors, so it's all kind of, there's a sort of sensuality there, so, you know, a sensuality of persona.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and to be honest, I mean, the thing that impresses me more than anything about anybody and everybody that does what you do is the fact that you can sit in a room and do it on your Todd and actually produce the goods. Because I find that, and I've written, but apart from the fact that I think what I've written when I've just written conventionally isn't as good as what I produce the way I do normally these days. But the sheer thing of actually doing it and, you know, it alone is the toughest bit, as far as I'm concerned. And I do derive a fantastic amount of stimulus from the pure gregarious experience of being with people.
Your method of working is so singular to you, that it almost seems to me that you are creating another medium, that you actually achieve a higher level of suspension of disbelief, where one is almost loses oneself. I mean, I think particularly something like the marvellous climactic scene of Secrets and Lies, where, you know, that's a long scene, it goes on for a long time. I watched it again recently. I've seen the film twice before. At no moment did I think there's a lot of men called Nigel with light meters dangling around their necks, standing just off the camera. You know, that my level of suspension of disbelief over that is total.
Absolutely,
you know, it's as if this living room of these people has been built on. Actually, it helps that I think you shot that around the corner from where I grew up, but I could be wrong about that.
Well, that would be very helpful, actually.
I think it was shot in Osselton Way in the Hampstead Garden suburb, but I could be wrong. No, it wasn't. I was wrong.
It was shot in Southgate.
Southgate. I mean, I was walking over here thinking, because I was coming to see you, everybody I passed, I thought, well, if I stop them and strike up a conversation, then I'll get that character business going. And I wonder whether it's like that for you. Are you an innate voyeur in the city?
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I can't help it, love it. I don't leave your letters lying around if I'm in your house.
Yeah. Oh, really? You're that bad? You're a biographer?
Yeah.
You would actually rifle my correspondence?
Yeah.
Right, well, you're not coming over.
Okay.
You've said quite explicitly that you view yourself as an outsider in some senses to the culture, or you know, do you feel, you know, is this your kind of town? Do you feel at home anywhere?
I have lived in London for 40 years this September, since I was 17, and you could only have a sort of, as a provincial, you can only have, at the end of the day, a kind of love-hate relationship with it. But the love bit is bigger than the hate.
My sense of division and ambivalence about the city is, to me, integral to the fact that, yes, I would define myself as a Londoner before being English, possibly even before being a man, certainly before being an artist in some way. It's a very primary identification in that sense. And so this is self-hatred for me. Hatred of London is self-hatred and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard. I mean, I grew up in Manchester, and Manchester in the 40s and particularly the 50s, which was my real growing up decade, was as dead as anything could be. It was a complete morgue, and we just couldn't get out quick enough. And all you wanted to do was go down to London, and that's what we all did, or some of us. And apart from the fact that Manchester is an entirely different sort of place now and has long since come alive, the identity of being a provincial in London, but in London and part of London and with complete access to London and all the rest of it, and therefore a kind of Londoner, is in itself an identity, and that's what it is for me.
I mean, for me, this idea of you standing outside the culture, whether you say it's from coming from a Mancunian background, I know you don't tend to talk to, I wouldn't say you play down, but it's something that seems to be, in some senses, edited out, is your Jewishness, and it doesn't seem to be a factor that you consider.
No, I think it is a factor.
Yeah.
There's no question it is a factor, and I mean, growing up, I mean, I think it's important that I grew up. And one thing that's important is that because my old man was a doctor, and we did live in a very working class area, but we lived over the shop, that in itself meant I grew up in a kind of immediate duality in my existence. I went to the local school, went to very working class schools, but was a middle class kid, and was one of the quite big minority, but the minority nonetheless, of Jewish kids. So all of that goes on, and there's no question. And indeed, I mean, far from, there's not much to say about the Jewishness, but actually I think that in some ways there is something, and this isn't a conscious thing, and it's not, I wouldn't want to make too much of it, but there is a kind of, in a certain way, a sort of Jewishness about my stuff, in the sense that there's a tension between the comic and the tragic. And the sort of,
yes, I would say that, and also a kind of something I think of as distinctively Jewish and East European, a sort of absurdism. I mean, I know that some people might say it was Beckettian and therefore Irish, but I'd see that as very Jewish as well.
Absolutely, I think you're dead right. Yeah.
But I'm not saying that you play it down, but I mean, for example, I've just finished a long novel on one of the major themes of which, or one of the major expressions of the character, is kind of Jewish anti-Semitism, and there doesn't seem to be any of that present in your work. And indeed, you've never really, to my knowledge, I mean, you've had some characters that, as it were, are liminally Jewish, but not where it's central to their identity in that way.
Not yet.
Not yet. Do you think that's something you might do? We
Could
don't know.
be.
Could
well,
be something.
Not yet implicitly means possibly yes.
Not only, but also.
Exactly.
But
I don't know. I've got mixed feelings about it, really. I mean, you see, in some ways it seems, it's good to kind of address things that your life is about, because they're there to deal with. But I don't exactly know whether it's something that I think is actually lies at the centre of what concerns me. I don't know, actually. I actually don't know.
It seems to me that you are a kind of outsider's outsider. Whether it was ever a conscious effort on your part, you didn't make a big deal about being rooted in Manchester's Jewish community. You didn't make a big deal about, as you say, you were this middle-class boy who was over the shop, and it turns out that you were literally over the shop because you were over the business of being observational, and almost in this kind of forensic way, like presumably your doctor was as a GP when he had somebody coming into the surgery and diagnosing them as they came in the door. Yeah. You're diagnosing the human condition as this, you've come to London, so you've got the provincial outsider element, and you're displaced in sort of class terms, in terms of a sort of classic socioeconomic gradient in that.
I think I would certainly admit to being a chronic outsider.
I think the missing component for understanding your work for me has been to realise that when you say, and you've said numerous times in interviews and so on and so forth, you said, I start with a blank slate, obviously I've got some ideas and everything. It's that you aren't wheeling in a big intellectual superstructure to all this. You aren't sort of thinking, Schopenhauer said the more I love mankind, the less I love man. Let's make a movie on that subject in any way at all.
Absolutely not.
You're letting it evolve.
Yeah, I'm doing what artists do, as opposed to intellectuals.
But you're also not mining your own autobiographical experience particularly. There are elements of it that come in.
Yes, I am, but not in a kind of systematic, conscious way. But it's there implicitly, sure. But seldom am I the character. Although there are certain kinds of things that get in there. You look at a character like Morris in The Photographer in Secrets and Lies, and somewhere along the line I'm sort of skulking in there. But I am with a whole load of them, and dare I say, probably somewhere along the line, even with our much talked about friend Johnny in Naked.
Well, I was going to ask you about him. Is there a Johnny voice that you can access in your psyche, a kind of ranting?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the frustration, it's the disappointment, it's the sadness at the deadness of the material world. Sure, of course.
But to sort of come full circle in a bizarre kind of way, it seems to me that, the incumbent regime, the current Labour government, has manifestly failed to challenge that in any way, shape or form. On the contrary, it's committed a bizarre kind of ideological arbitrage where it's sort of sold that's most clearly what it's sold downriver, is any credibility associated with establishing the status quo of materialism. And that's an enormous disenchantment for any of us who believed in the socialist project, isn't it?
Totally, absolutely.
In a sense, the worst disenchantment we could have,
Yes, and it leaves you... It's hard to know where to put it, where to take it, where to go with it. It's very frustrating and very worrying and very sad.
I know that you don't sort of respond. You're not a sort of, kind of up to the beat artist who responds to things in the short term. But it seems to me inevitable that you must want to say something about that, and say something about this denouement of the last 5 years.
You have to digest these things. You have to understand them in all sorts of contexts. There's no question, but that when, for example, when we made High Hopes, it was very easy, certainly very much easier than what we're talking about now, to have very clear feelings about Thatcher. But actually what High Hopes is about is not primarily about being a Thatcher-bashing picture. It's actually about the difficulty of how to be a socialist and knowing how to do it, how to be it, and what exactly to be, and what to do about it. And the tragedy is that remains the problem.
I mean, in a way, High Hopes is really, it's made, I think, in '88, but really it's a film that crystallises the first term of Thatcher, isn't it? It's sort of off the bat. It's almost your digested thoughts over that half-decade
Yes,
then coming to fruition.
I think that's right.
So we can expect the great, you know, Blairite response, sort of another 5 years down the line. We trust.
Could be.
Well, you'll be in trouble from this quarter if you don't come up with it.
I'll stay north of the river.
You know.
Is Will Self your real name?
Yes, it is. Oh, yeah,
Fantastic
no, it's my real
name. It's the
yeah.
best real name I've come across.
It's a real English name, and it comes from Seawolf. And up round Cromer in North Norfolk, there's an awful lot of selves. You look in the phone book and there's heaps of us, and it's a perfectly common name. We're English peasants, and my mother's name is Rosenblum, so I'm half English peasant, half Jewish New Yorker. So, you know, I suppose one of the things I didn't touch upon was, you know, I suppose from the outside, we got there because, you know, so far as, you know, it's like a stereoscopic postcard. One way you look at the class system, it seems monolithic and like an ant's nest. And you look at it the other way, and it's totally incoherent. People like you and I don't belong anywhere, you know, and we don't really know who we are in those terms.
Oh, right.